Welcome to Sea Bear's Sanity, because when you live in an insane world, the sane shall be called crazy. You know, I am a child of the 70s. I was born in 1966, and I remember the 70s. I remember Flower Children, and I remembered the slogan of "Make Love, Not War." I remember my father having a peace symbol bumper sticker on the back of our car that said "the footprint of the American chicken." And of course, it got ripped off shortly after he put it on. So I remember this growing up, and then, that was the left, right? Those were the liberals. And I look at the liberals today. Are they really liberals? I don't think they are anymore. They've morphed into something different. I call them leftists or leftards because I have liberal philosophies. While I am a conservative, I still believe in a lot of the liberal causes that I grew up with. So I ask myself, how did we get from the Flower Children that pushed peace, love, and unity, who questioned authority and believed in a better world, to where we now have a cancel culture where if you disagree with somebody, they will try to destroy your life, your business, your livelihood, your family, your home, your very existence. I just saw a video of a guy threatening an ICE agent that he was going to kill him, his family, and burn his house down. How do we go from peace, love, and unity to "I'm going to kill you"? And both the Flower Children and the rioters of today both claim to be on the left. How did we get here? Well, I started putting this video together, and it's an interesting progression, right? In the 1960s, right, the idealism begins, right? Peace, love, and unity. They questioned authority and believed in a better world. Then in the 1970s, they began to question everything, right? The protests grew, institutions became the enemy, and civil disobedience became virtuous, right? I remember, people protesting the war in Vietnam, where they would peacefully assemble and face off against National Guard, but never threatened, never rose up in anger, and they prevailed. Then we move into the 1980s. Now, in the 1980s, I went to high school, and that was when I went to the academy. So the second half of the 80s, my wife and I have this conversation quite a bit. I don't remember a lot of the social, economic, or political scene, as I was kind of isolated at the academy. So the second half of the 80s is kind of, obscured to me. But in the 80s, right, political disagreements increasingly became personal. The focus shifted from broad economic debates towards questions of identity, race, gender, sexuality. Group membership began shaping political allegiances. From there, we move into the 90s. And again, the early 90s to me were it's kind of, a blur because I was in the Navy. I was out to sea a lot. But during the 90s, critics argue that social status became increasingly connected to grievances. Victimhood gained cultural influence. Personal hardship became political capital. And social conflicts were increasingly interpreted through competing narratives of oppression. Right? So then we shift into the 2000s. The 2000s, to me, I remember 9/11 and the dropping of the towers. I was a patriot. I was, all for going out there and taking care of business. But during the early 2000s was also when I remember for the first time hearing the term political correctness. I heard it from Rush Limbaugh. I'm like, what the hell is political correctness? But language itself had become a battleground. Words were no longer viewed merely as communication. They were increasingly treated as a form of harm. Microaggressions, anyone? New rules emerged around acceptable speech. Critics saw protection, and others saw censorship. We became more and more divided. As we move into the 2010s, right, social media came on the scene. I remember the first time I heard of Facebook. I actually joined because the narrative was that you could help reconnect with friends from high school and college. And I reconnected with some people that I knew from the academy. And I'll never forget this because one Saturday, my son and I spent a good deal of time trying to unlock Luigi on Mario Galaxy because you had to do this one map perfectly in a certain amount of time and overturn all these tiles. And we spent a long time of that day trying to unlock Luigi. And when we finally did, I boasted on Facebook that my son and I had finally unlocked Luigi. And one of my academy classmates came back and told me that what a colossal waste of time. It really angered me because I didn't feel it was a waste of time. I spent time with my son. But it really ruined the rest of the weekend because I was very angry that someone would say that to me. And by Monday morning, I had realized that I had let someone who I had not seen in over 20 years ruin my weekend. And I had decided at that point that I no longer wanted to allow other people to control my emotional state. So I deleted Facebook and I've never gone back. But when it comes to the social media, right, a single post could elevate or destroy a reputation overnight. Public shaming became instantaneous, permanent, and global. The phrase cancel culture entered the public vocabulary. From 2014 to 2016, the outrage became power. Emotional intensity became political currency. Anger generated attention, and attention generated influence. The loudest voices increasingly dominated public conversation. We were falling away from the original objective of make love, not war, but no one seemed to care. They saw righteous indignation as a form of political currency that could be spent to push their agendas, whether they were for good or ill. From 2016 to 2019, right, the dehumanization came on scene where we started dehumanizing people that we didn't agree with. Political opponents stopped being merely mistaken. Increasingly, they were portrayed as dangerous, evil, and irredeemable. The possibility of persuasion gave way to condemnation. You don't agree with me, so you must be evil. That is wrong on so many levels. When we push into the 2020s, right, we look at the Great Divide. America entered a period of extraordinary division. Protests swept the major cities. Some remained peaceful, but others turned violent. Debate over justice, policing, and public order dominated the national conversation. From 2020 to 2021, right, we went into cancel everything. Symbols became targets. Historical figures, monuments, and institutions were destroyed. I can never justify removing the statues of our heroes, good or ill. I remember, I live in the South, and I still cannot believe they took down the statue of General Lee. Whether you agree with General Lee or not, he was a fantastic general, and in fact, he could have won the Civil War had he maintained command and control at Gettysburg. But that is irrelevant. The fact that we are destroying our history because, quote unquote, it offended somebody, dooms us to repeat those errors at some point in the future. The past is prologue. We have to remember our past so that we can learn from it and grow from it. We don't erase it and forget it, because then it will come back to haunt us at some point in the future. Critics argued that history should be erased, and supporters argued that injustice was finally being confronted. From 2021 to 2023, corporate and institutions capitulated to these demands. Businesses and universities and major organizations increasingly adopted activist language and priorities. Diversity programs expanded and public statements became expected. Neutrality became difficult to maintain. I worked in corporate America. I kid you not, the last company I worked for, they put together a program where they wanted us to go sleep with the homeless so that we could better understand what they were going through. I refused to do it. Probably one reason why I got laid off. Because I told my boss that catching typhus from a homeless person was not in my job description. At this same company, I was forced to take 3 days of training on microaggressions and misgendering. Took me out of the field for 3 days. I can only imagine what the cost must have been for political correct bullshit. In 2023, violence became normalized. Critics argued that violence was increasingly excused when committed for approved causes. Property destruction became framed as a means of expression. Law enforcement became viewed with growing suspicion, and the line between protest and destruction became increasingly contested. Do I have to cut and post a video of CNN when Minneapolis was burning from the BLM riots, that it was mostly peaceful, when a building was on fire behind the reporter? This is wrong. How did we get here from the peace, love, and unity arguments where this all began? In 2024, silencing dissent came on the scene. Online platforms gained unprecedented influence over public discourse. Accounts were removed if you posted anything that was not approved. Content was restricted. Debates over misinformation collided with concerns about censorship. And the struggle over who controls speech intensified. Free speech had become dangerous. I never thought in a million years growing up that anyone would argue that free speech was a danger to democracy. And that's a whole nother video I want to go into, because the last time I checked, free speech is essential to democracy. You have your opinion, I have my opinion. Let's talk and find common ground. That is democracy. Silencing your opposition, whether through violence or censorship, is fascism. People seem to change the definitions, and I think people need to rediscover old dictionaries from what this thing called a library, rather than simply asking Google for a definition. In 2025, the next generation is starting to speak out. They were raised in hate and taught division. Activism became not merely an activity, it became their very identity. Political engagement increasingly shapes social belongings, friendships, and personal meanings. What are we doing? In 2026, violence is now commonplace. Protests equal violence. Cancel equals destruction. It's not a movement, it's a mentality. The critic's warning reaches a conclusion. A society where confrontation replaces conversation, where destruction replaces persuasion, where anger becomes permanent. Whether this future, this world that we live in persists, remains uncertain. We're going to have to start stepping up, people. We need to start talking to each other rather than hating each other. Every generation inherits the consequences of the one before it. The question is not whether societies change. They will always change. They always do. The question is whether they remember what they were trying to preserve: compassion, freedom, dialogue, and understanding. Perhaps the challenge ahead is not chosen between left and right, but recovering the ability to disagree without hatred, to protest without destruction, to persuade without coercion. And to remember that every movement, no matter how noble its beginnings, must continually ask what it is becoming. Because history is not written by ideals alone. It is written by the choices made in their name. People, we need to start talking to each other. We need to open that dialogue if democracy has any hope of preservation. Because the path we are on right now is dark, where one side has a voice and the other side will be sent to re-education camps, concentration camps. Is the Fourth Reich beginning to rise? A question for another video. Anyways, that's it for this one. This is the Sea Bear, out.